I forgot to talk about timeline issues. I told you I was going to talk about timeline issues. So here's what I want to say about that. There's a few things about the timeline of this show that kind of make it really hard to buy into the story. And so I think they could be fixed quite easily. And I think they should be. Like, why not? Like, just fix them, just change them, just make a different timeline. So one thing is that if we're supposed to buy into the whole romance between Kim and Chris, we should get a clearer idea of how much time they've actually spent together before they get separated. And it's not very clear. Like, we kind of get the idea that they've spent 1 or 2 nights together and then they never see each other for 3 years. But that's not actually that clear. I think by necessity it should be a short period of time because there needs to be some ambiguity, I think, around whether they saw themselves as married, like a real we're in it to forever kind of couple, or we're just trying this out and seeing where it goes. Because, yeah, they get separated while they're still in that honeymoon period. I think they should be together for like a week or 2, but it would be very easy to interpret from the way it's staged that maybe it was just a night or 2. But then you could also interpret it as maybe it was a month or 2. It's so unclear. Okay, and then the next kind of timeline thing is like when it jumps forward 3 years, it means that we have this 2-year-old child, and that is difficult to cast. On like thinking, brainstorming different ways of casting this, like you could go younger. You could go, okay, it's a 1-year-old child, and then you can sort of do it with a doll a bit more easily because they're sleeping all the time, presumably. Or you could go longer and make it like a 6-year-old child, right? And maybe that would be something you could cast a bit more ethically. And would that still work dramatically if you had like a longer gap? I mean, there are some things that would work better because the other timeline issue sort of thing is that we hear from Chris's friend John that after they were separated, Chris spent a whole year looking for Kim and couldn't find her and didn't talk to anyone else during that time, but then eventually after a year he decides to move on with his life. Okay. But then we also hear more than once that Chris and Alan have been married for more than 2 years. So how can both those things be true if this gap was only 3 years? That doesn't really work unless there's an extra leap of time that isn't described or explained between Act 1 and Act 2, because we sort of finish Act 1 leaving Saigon, and then we start Act 2 and Kim and the engineer are living in Bangkok. And presumably like only a month has passed, but maybe like a year has passed. We don't really know. I suppose the only way we know is by seeing that the child, Tam, has not aged. So maybe this all has to be quite quick in succession so that you can have like the same child. But then maybe it would be better to have a different child in Act 2. And, you know, this could be 2 years later. And then instead of a 3-year-old child, you could have a 5-year-old child, or instead of a 6-year-old child, you could have an 8-year-old child. I don't know. Like, I'm just kind of thinking of different options. The other thing, just coming back to that child casting thing for a minute, I saw a production of Madama Butterfly. It was directed by Anthony Minghella. The Anthony Minghella production did this with a puppet, and it had like, I think 3 people controlling this puppet who's like a 2 or 3-year-old child. And I loved it. I realized that if you're going to suddenly have a character played by a puppet, it might mean that you need to change a few other things about the show, but like you could have other characters played by puppets. I mean, isn't that what soldiers are? Isn't that what sex workers are in brothels when they're being manipulated by an engineer? At least, you know, like there's an argument for that. There could be other puppets. But one thing that was really good about having this character played by a puppet is it was so expressive. It added a lot because this child was part of the action, and something to think about. How far away are we from like animatronic children robot actors? Not far, right? Yeah, so yeah, it's just around the corner. Let's wait for that perhaps. So I was talking about timeline issues. I'm so easily distracted. Timeline issue the next. What was the next? Well, yeah, I think that was kind of most of them. So like the marriage, 2 years plus 1 year of not talking to anyone, that didn't add up because like you don't get married on the day you meet someone. Oh wait, it's Chris. He does get married to the day he meets someone. I think, right? Like, oh, what? I don't get it.